Good morning, everyone. It's Bree here at Blossom and Branch Farm, and today we're going to be doing some dahlia maintenance. So if you've planted dahlias this year, this video is going to be for you. So maybe some things that you might be encountering, some things that you want to do to keep your dahlias healthy as they're growing, and a little bit of tips for pests. All right, so here we are at our dahlia row. Now these are the dahlias that actually overwintered this year. So here in zone 5-6, this was a miracle that these guys overwintered because it saves us so much work when we don't have to dig them up every year and replant them in the spring. You can go back and watch our video on how we did that if you're interested. What you need to know is these ones are a lot further along than the ones that we planted in the spring. We had a very unusually cold spring and summer, and so the ones we planted in the spring are further behind. As you can see, we're starting to get some blooms here. Our first bloomers are usually these ones down here on the end. These are Wine-Eyed Jill. And because they're the first bloomers, they're also usually the ones that start to show any pest damage first. So you can see we're getting some nibbling on some of these petals here. This is very normal. It happens all the time that you start to see a little bit of this. And usually this is where pest damage shows up, is right on the edges of the petals. You don't have to worry. It's very easy to counteract this, especially if you are growing them for cuts, because we're going to bag them. And bagging is just a really quick and easy way to prevent any damage to the blooms that you do want to cut. If you're going to be bagging your dahlias, you'll want to use these. These are organza bags. As you can see, they're translucent and they have a little cinch tie at the bottom. And this is key because this keeps things from climbing up the stem, especially earwigs. Usually what you'll want to do is actually put this on when the buds are about this stage, so before they have opened. So you could even do it earlier, like at this stage, because this stage the bugs can actually do quite a bit of damage as they eat the edges of the petals, and then you don't see that damage until they open. So again, if you're growing these for cuts, this can be a good idea to help keep them looking perfect. So we'll just slide the bag over the top, and then we're going to pull this cinch shut. You want to make sure that it's nice and snug around the base of the stem, again, because that's going to help keep those earwigs from coming up the stem. I'm also placing this bag nice and high on the stem. As the flower opens this way, it'll have plenty of room within the bag and it won't get squished. So again, place it up nice and high versus down like this, because if you put it down like this, it's going to squish the bloom as it opens, so keep it up nice and high. Now, if you're not cutting them and you want them in your landscape, having a bunch of bags on top of your dahlias doesn't usually look that great and kind of defeats the purpose of having a beautiful flower in your garden if you just have these bags on top of them. So there are a few things that you can do if you're getting a lot of pest damage, and one is trimming the lower leaves. So trimming the lower leaves just helps. It just helps to deter pests mostly. So you'll see that the lower leaves here have a lot of damage. Earwigs will come and eat these. Slugs, if you're in a wetter zone, we don't have a lot of them here, but I know a lot of people do. So what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll start to remove these lower leaves. This is just going to help the dahlia by deterring those lower munching pests and by keeping this ground a little bit more exposed, which is just going to create a less hospitable place for any of those little ground dwelling nibblers hanging out down there on the soil level. Just even doing that and getting a little bit more air circulation down in here is going to be helpful for those dahlias. Once you have that soil exposed, another trick that you can do is for earwigs and slugs specifically. If you're finding that you're getting a lot of damage from those, we're going to bury a little trap down here at the base of the dahlia. We're going to put it at soil level, and we're going to fill it up with some soy sauce and a little bit of vegetable oil. That's just going to serve as a little trap. So it's a way to deal with things like earwigs and slugs if you're getting a lot of that kind of damage by trapping them without damaging the beneficial insect population. Now you can see we do have the nasturtium growing here that we planted along the outside row of the dahlias, and these just serve as a little trap crop, and they're helping to keep the dahlias protected as well. So trap cropping is a great thing to do, especially when you're growing these dahlias. I like to use nasturtium because the bunnies like the nasturtium, and also the earwigs like them, the roly-polies like them. So it's a good deterrent if we're getting a lot of damage from those. So interplanting your dahlias with something else is also going to be very helpful. Now, something that starts to happen as these dahlias start to get tall, and this especially happens with this variety because it's very tall. Remember, if you saw our video when we planted these, that we put in this jute netting, and this netting helps to hold them up horizontally, but as they get taller, they often will need a little bit more support. So we're going to come in, we're going to do a rope around these little hoops, and we're going to go a little bit higher up. If you don't have hoops, you can just use T-posts and you'll do the same thing. You're gonna go a little bit higher up and you're gonna corral those dahlias. That's gonna help keep them from flopping over, especially as they get taller and more top heavy, and especially if you're growing the very large dinner plate dahlias, those ones really tend to topple easily. So we're gonna corral them just to keep that under control from the get-go. So I'm using hemp twine. You can use jute. I just prefer to use hemp because I find it gives less as it gets wet. So I'm just starting with a knot here. And again, if you don't have these posts already installed, if you don't have a hoop, you can just use T-posts. And I'm gonna go around this first one. And then I'm just going all the way around the outsides. So you can see how this will help as these get taller. It'll just help keep them from flopping over. We've definitely not done this in the past. And then I always regret it because these dahlias do just tend to flop over. And this hemp twine just seems to be really nice and sturdy and hardy, especially for outdoor use. I've really been liking it this year. It also just helps keep our walkways a little bit more clear. So if we don't do this, they'll tend to splay out and into this walkway area, and then it gets really hard to work around here. So just go like that all the way around, and that will help keep them supported as they grow taller. These are the ones that we planted in the spring, and we're gonna go take a look at those because you might recall that I planted some buckwheat in those. So let's go take a look and see how those are doing. So believe it or not, there are dahlias in here. Now the reason that this buckwheat that we interplanted got so much taller is because when I showed this video, I actually planted the buckwheat at the same time as the tubers as a demonstration. Normally I actually wait for the tubers to be up and out of the ground. So I wait for those tubers to be about this tall before I plant the buckwheat, usually. This time I didn't, so it grew faster than the dahlia tubers. It's not a big deal. It's really easy to deal with buckwheat, and it's gonna give us a nice green mulch to add organic matter to the soil. So what I'm gonna do is I just have an electric trimmer. You can do this by hand too if you planted buckwheat in here, like I did. All you're gonna do is you're gonna go right through. So I'm gonna turn this on. So as I've cut through this top layer, I'm actually gonna grab a lot of this that I cut down because we're gonna put this on the soil level for a mulch. But now that I've done that, you can actually see here are the tops of the dahlias here. So all we had to do was to get those dahlias exposed so that they get a little bit of sunlight. So we just trimmed back the top of that buckwheat. So if you did that interplanting like I did in my video and your buckwheat is getting too tall, don't worry about it, just knock it down. If you don't want your buckwheat reseeding itself, you'll also want to do this because it will reseed. The other thing I want to point out while we're here is that these dahlias did not get pinched. So if you did not pinch your dahlias and they're getting quite tall, you have two options. So at this point, we have the option to go ahead and pinch it. And if I'm going to pinch it, I'm just going to take down right here above this set of leaves, and now we'll get branching from here. You have the option to do that, but you don't have to pinch if you don't want to. If your dahlias are already getting quite tall or they already have buds on them, it might be best just to let them bloom and then cut them down far. So cut them down so that they're nice and long, about fingertip to elbow, and then you'll get branching from where you cut. So it's okay, it's not a big deal if you didn't get a chance to pinch them. When you do your first cut on your first bloom, they'll branch from where you cut them the first time.
The last thing I'm going to say is that I often get asked about how to fertilize dahlias and how often you should be fertilizing. And to be honest, this is really a question that I prefer to not answer. And the reason is because it's different for everyone and it totally depends on what is going on with your soil. So for me to tell you that you need to be fertilizing this often with this product would be misleading. If you want to know what I fertilize my dahlias with, nothing. I don't use any fertilizers here at the farm. I find that cover cropping is usually the best way to go and creates the best soil health and soil biology, which leads to the healthiest plants and great blooms without having to buy in fertilizers. I hope this video today was helpful for you in figuring out what you should be doing at this time of year with your dahlias. Let me know what you'd like to see next, and remember to like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot here at the farm. See you next time.